Alright, third time trying to make this video work. It's gonna work. Hey, it's video 3.3. What a coincidence. Changes in matter. That's the name of this one. Here we're going to look at describing physical change and defining or listing several types of physical changes. And then we'll look at chemical change and list some indicators that say a chemical change is taking place. So, before we get going, make sure you get yourself focused by turning off any distractions, pause, rewind as you need to, take some extra notes in the margins, and ask those questions later. So, physical change. Physical change is any change that alters a substance without changing its composition. What that means is if the substance was H2O, there's ways you can change H2O, but when that change is all done, it better still be H2O. If it's the same before and afterwards, we call those physical changes. Basically, a physical change will change the physical properties. So for example, here we're changing from solid to a liquid as we melt the ice. Here we're crushing the can, so we're changing its volume. Here we're tearing a piece of paper, so we're changing its volume. And if you have two new pieces of paper, you might change the mass you had as well. Here we're cutting a log. But most importantly, when all these changes take place, it's still the same thing before and after. That's why it's a physical change. Phase changes are a special type of physical change in which the state of matter changes. Okay? So for example, and here's some different things you're going to write down for in your notes here. Let's see, it's number 4. Label the different changes here. So if you go from a solid to a liquid, we call that melting. Okay, so you should write melt in here. And if you go from a liquid back to a solid, we call that freezing. Okay, this shouldn't be too shocking, right? Okay, so here's some freezing of ice, here's some melting of ice. Okay, then we have another transition, which is vaporization or evaporation. Well, I like vaporization better. So vaporization is when you go from a liquid to a gas. If we put the E in front, basically that means you're doing it without adding heat. That's how things can evaporate. And then condensation is when a gas turns back into a liquid. Okay, so here we have vaporization taking place. And over here, the gaseous water in this case, is condensating on the outside of this water bottle here. Okay, and then our more uncommon phase changes are these two. So the one on the right hand side here, you're looking at sublimation. Solids can convert directly into a gas in one step, and we call that sublimation when they do that. The best example of that is dry ice, which is carbon dioxide. That's the gas you breathe out. When it's in the solid state, we call it dry ice, and then it turns right into the gas phase directly. And you can see like in punch bowls around Halloween time. That's called sublimation. And the exact opposite, when you go right from a gas directly to a solid, that's called deposition. And deposition, a good example of that is like frost. Like Jack Frost visits the trees in the wintertime, or you get frost on your windshield. That's when the gas turns directly into a solid. These are called phase changes. And going back to number 3 in your notes here, a phase change is not a chemical change because the substance is still the same. So for example, if you have water, which is H2O, and you freeze it, it's still H2O. And if you melt it again back into a liquid, it's still H2O. And if you heat it up and you boil it and it turns into a gas, it's still H2O. If it condensates back into a liquid, it's still H2O. And if water vapor deposits on your windshield, that's H2O still. And then if it turns back into a gas on its own and disappears on its own, that's called sublimation. So phase changes are physical changes because the substance stays the same. Let's look at the chemical change column on your notes now. So chemical change, or also called chemical reaction, these are changes when a substance changes, or when a new substance changes, that you can write in your notes there, when a new substance is produced. Okay, so if H2O turns into something else, like maybe it splits apart into its two elements, hydrogen and oxygen gas, that's called a chemical change because you created a new substance or substances. Now there's some different pieces of evidence that chemical change will occur. If your substance changes color, it is probably a chemical change. If it changed temperature when the reaction happened, it was a chemical change. If light is produced, it was a chemical change. If a gas has been formed, and oftentimes you'll see this because bubbles are produced in a liquid, that's how you know a gas is being changed. Sometimes a precipitate might form. A precipitate is a new solid that forms from two liquids that are mixed together. Okay, so chemical change, a new substance produced, and make sure you're aware of the evidence for chemical change. Sometimes you also might see these terms down here being used once in a while, and if you like hear a statement about something, it probably means chemical change is taking place. So if something decomposes, if something explodes or rusts, oxidizes, tarnishes, ferments, burns, rots, or digests, those words also indicate chemical change is taking place. Okay, but don't mess that up or mix it up with this. These are the evidence that chemical change has taken place. So here's some quick problems for you to do on Edpuzzle. Enter your answers when you're done going through them, and then see the answers when you're all done. Okay, so silver spoon tarnishes. That means it has chemically changed into something else. It turned like a black color. If you crush aluminum can, that's a physical change because you're just crushing the can. It's still a can. Freezing water is a phase change or a physical change. It's just changing state of matter. When you burn wood, it's definitely giving off light and heat and changing color when it's all done, so that's a chemical change. If copper turns green, color change there, that's a chemical change. And if you grind your coffee beans, that's a physical change because you're just changing the beans into more of a powder-like substance. So, that's your video on physical versus chemical change.